Hi, welcome to the Shepherd Podcast. I'm your host. I'm Pastor Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today. The podcast is a way to acquaint you with people in our church, school, and childcare, and to share with you some of their experiences. Today, I'm really pleased to have as my guest Gary Larsen. Gary has been a member of Shepherd of the Hills for about 25 years. He's a proud grandpa of 2 graduates of our school. He's had a diverse career, including 25 years in the Air Force, attaining the rank of colonel. He's a psychologist. He has run a medical company. He's taught at UTSA. And so he's had a lot of different experiences. But the experience that I'd like to highlight for you today is none of those things, but it's something that he's chosen to do as a spiritual experience and a travel experience. It's called the Camino De Santiago. So Gary's going to walk us through that, tell us about it, educate us about it, and we'll also have some visual illustrations to take us there. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, Gary, for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I want to talk about the Camino de Santiago, which we have discussed before just on a personal basis. I know it's something that you've really enjoyed, and you've enjoyed it so much that you've done it multiple times, right?
Correct, yes.
How many times have you done it?
The Camino de Santiago I've done 3 times, and the Way of St. Olaf in Norway I've done once.
Okay. And so before we get any further, we should define what is this Camino de Santiago that we're talking about. What is it?
Well, the Camino is there are three basically pilgrimages that have been historic. The pilgrimage to Santiago is one of them, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and a pilgrimage to Rome. But the Camino de Santiago it's in Spain, but people come from all over the world. I met a man from the Ukraine that had walked from the Ukraine to Santiago. So people come from England, they come from everywhere. Along the way, we see people from all over the world, from South Korea, from Australia, from South Africa. So it's a very international experience. The Camino de Santiago is probably about 1,000 years old now, and originally was a Catholic pilgrimage, and a Catholic pilgrimage for indulgences probably, and also for just for people who had sinned greatly. They would send them on the Camino.
Is that why you've gone there 3 times?
Exactly. Still didn't work. And well, it's interesting because I met a priest, an American priest, along the way, and he was kind of with us many stops. And we got to Santiago right about the same time together. But one of the stories he told was meeting a young Italian woman who was coming along on the Camino. And he asked her why she had come, and she said, well, my priest told me I needed to do it for penance. And this was about after, I guess we'd probably been walking for 3 weeks by that time, so everybody's pretty tired and blistered. And he said, oh my God, he said, what are you, a serial killer? And so people did it for penance originally, and then it kind of fell out of favor for hundreds of years. During the Middle Ages, it was probably the biggest. And then about the 1980s, people started coming back and wanting to do the pilgrimage again. So around Spain, there are many routes around Spain, coming from Madrid, coming from the south, coming from Portugal. But the main route that is the busiest route is called the Camino Frances, which comes from the border of France all the way across the top of Spain, through Pamplona, Leon, Burgos, and then ends in Santiago. And all of the routes end in Santiago.
Okay. Now, you compared it to Jerusalem and Rome as one of the 3 big pilgrimage sites. Okay, I know what's in Jerusalem. I know what's in Rome. Is there a final destination here that parallels those places, or how did this get to be up there as part of the big 3?
Well, it's because of St. James. There are a lot of legends about how St. James came to be there. St. James is the patron saint of Spain. And all over Spain, you'll find images. In every church, St. James has got a statue, icons, pictures everywhere of St. James. The legends are that he came to Spain after Christ was crucified. He came to Spain to preach the gospel. and traveled throughout Spain, primarily in the northwest corner of Spain, up in the Galicia region. And then after he had preached in Spain for a while, he left. He went back to Rome, and in 44 AD, he was beheaded by Herod Agrippa. And his followers took his body and took him back to Spain. And there are a lot of different legends about how they found his bones, his relics again, and whether they really are his relics or not. But the legend is that he was brought back and was beatified there, and his bones or his relics are now in the cathedral in Santiago.
Okay.
So people make the pilgrimage, the religious pilgrimage, to see and be there where St. James is. And there's stories of St. James hundreds of years after he died, during the battle with the Moors that the Spaniards had, that in one of the significant battles, St. James showed up on a white horse and helped to defeat the Moors at that point.
Oh.
And that's part of how he became the patron saint of Spain.
I see. Now, when we're talking St. James, just to be clear for our listeners, there's multiple Jameses in the New Testament. Which one is this?
This is James the Elder, the brother of John.
Okay, James, the brother of John, whose martyrdom is recorded in the book of Acts.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of legend that developed.
There's a lot of legend
him.
that came. I mean, that's recorded, and so that's probably a pretty good fact, but everything after that is a little different. There are legends where his body was lost at sea by great waves, and it was swept up onto the shore, and it was covered with scallop shells, and so it was preserved by the scallop shells, and then it was buried and discovered many, many years later. The bones were discovered many years later. Others are that he was just brought there by his disciples and buried and then rediscovered. The burial site was secret, and then it was rediscovered later. So just a lot of legend around how he got there. Yeah. But he's very much revered throughout Spain, and that's why people take the religious pilgrimage to Santiago.
And now, how did you get started with this in the first place?
Well, I have a good friend, David White, who's a poet. He's an Irish fellow who lives in Seattle for the last many years. And I traveled with David and hiked in Ireland and in Tuscany and other places. And he's a very prolific poet, very internationally known poet. And he wrote a book called Pilgrim. And in there, in his poems, he talks about Santiago, and he talks about the Camino De Santiago. And he and I were having a conversation one day about it. And his niece had done it, other people had done it that he knew. And he's a world traveler, but hadn't done the Camino. But he wrote beautiful poems about it. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him, I said, well, who in their right mind would walk 500 miles? I don't really understand how you would want to do that. Mm-hmm. But, the Camino is a strange thing that once you start thinking about it, it just won't leave your brain. It just kept nagging away. And so I finally decided in 2014 I was going to do it.
That was your first time?
That was when I was going to start. So I started training in probably 2013. I'd just come back from Tuscany with him and decided I was going to hike the Camino. Mm-hmm. And I trained, and then as I was getting ready to leave, I found out I had cancer, so I went through chemotherapy. Right. And I hiked the 500 miles in San Antonio that summer while I was in chemotherapy, so I could stay ready. And then in 2015, I took off.
Wow.
Got on the plane, and on my way to Santiago, or on my way to Spain, over the Atlantic Ocean, we had a storm, and the plane turned around, and we came back. So I thought I'd never get off to Santiago. But we eventually got there, and I got myself to Roncesvalles, where I started the pilgrimage.
Okay, so your first time doing this was the year after you had chemo.
Right.
Wow, what a bounce back.
It was a good thing to do.
That must have felt very gratifying to have been able to conquer that after everything you've been through.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. So you did it, and you enjoyed it so much, you did it 2 more times. You mentioned that there's something about it that just kind of draws a person in, even before going. It just draws you in.
Yeah, it kept just kind of nagging away at me that there was some reason to go, and there should be I needed to go. I mean, and so I went alone, and many people do go alone. Some people come with friends, some people come with spouses or partners, but a lot of people go alone. So along the way, you meet a lot of people from all over the world. But the draw was to do something on my own. It's very contemplative, because you're on the road walking probably anywhere from 15 to 20 miles a day, and through lots of hills and mountains and a lot of other environments, and it's very gratifying. My mantra along the way, on the days when it wasn't so much fun, it was, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I think I repeated that thousands of times in my head.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to put myself there. Okay, so I'm in Spain. I don't speak the language. I've never been there before. I'm walking 500 miles. How do I know I'm walking in the right direction? Was it ever scary being out there by yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like?
Oh, great question. Thank you for asking. The way is very well marked, especially on that route, the French route. Well, most of the routes are pretty well marked, but there was a priest who has passed away some time ago now, but when he started walking, it wasn't quite so easy, and so he devised the yellow arrow method of marking the way so that people would know which way to go. So all over Spain, you'll see the yellow arrows pointing the direction to Santiago. So along the route, there's yellow arrows, and because the scallop shell is such a big part of the Camino, like I said, the legend about St. James, but the other part of the scallop shells, when people would get to Santiago, since it's right near the coast, scallops are very plentiful, and so people would bring back scallop shells as kind of proof that they had walked the Camino back in the Middle Ages. So the scallop shell has always been a big part of it. So all over Spain, you'll see markers that are on the ground, markers, tiles that are on walls, painted scallop shells, and the scallop shell also points the way towards Santiago. So the routes are very well marked, and then there are many guidebooks that are written that tell you kind of when to turn and how far to go before you turn again, but you can pretty much do the whole thing by just following the yellow arrows and the scallop shells.
I'm thinking today there must be an app on your phone, too, to make sure you're walking in the right direction.
I'm sure that, there are a lot of GPS apps that'll tell you. A couple of times on one of my Caminos, there were several of us standing at a corner trying to figure out which way to go next. And somebody brought their phone out, and they had it on their phone, so we found the right route.
Right.
The guidebook was all ripped apart and sweat stained, and so but the phone worked really well.
Yeah. Were there ever any moments when you were fearful that you were lost or that you were in danger out there by yourself?
I wasn't particularly afraid. There were times when you're by yourself. Some days I would be walking, and there's hundreds of people on the Camino Frances normally, but even on that, some days I would walk for several hours and never see anybody else. On the Camino Primitivo, the last one I did, sometimes you could be out there almost an entire day in the mountains by yourself.
Wow.
Because very few people walk that one. That's much less traveled.
Okay.
And I don't remember really being afraid. I was always worried about the young women I would meet. There were oftentimes a lot of single younger people who were on the Camino, and I kind of walked and tried to keep an eye on them for a while as long as I could, but they usually were walking a lot faster than I was walking.
Oh, yeah.
But there have been some bad incidents on the Camino, particularly with unaccompanied women, typically.
Sure.
So it's generally very safe, but there are things to be aware of and concerned about.
Well, why don't you take us there? Why don't you tell us some of the main stops or the main sites to see along the way, and then anything you want to share, stories or encounters that you had along the route.
Yeah, the French route starts, like I said, in Roncesvalles, which is in the mountains. So you start in the mountains. You usually start, and some people start in France at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and that's a 1 day, 2 day maybe hike into Spain. So That's a route that Napoleon took, so people like to take the Napoleon route. So I started in Roncesvalles, and that was my first day. Was in the mountains in the rain, and it was one of those days you think, and I'm doing this. Why?
Yeah, day one in the mountains.
Day one in the mountains in the rain for about 18 miles, and I'd started climbing into the mountains, and something happened with one of my knees. And I had brought some knee supports, but I thought I didn't need those. I could do this without. And that knee plagued me the entire Camino for 32 days after that. It was not fun.
You were determined.
But lots of ibuprofen.
Yeah.
Got me through it.
Yeah.
But so the first day is in the mountains, and after 2 days you end up in Pamplona. And Pamplona is kind of fun just because it's a city that everybody kind of knows about, the running of the bulls, and it was Hemingway's favorite city in Spain. So they love Hemingway, so there's Hemingway stuff all over. Hemingway's favorite bar, Hemingway's favorite restaurant, all those things are in the guidebooks.
Okay.
So it's kind of fun to catch up with Hemingway.
Yes.
And after that, you're kind of walking through a lot of small cities, small towns. I think it was probably 2 weeks into that trip when the next big city was Burgos. And I had booked all my hotel rooms along the way before I left. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to keep to a schedule to get to all these hotel rooms. Normally, or many people will stay in albergues, which are like pensions, or like youth hostels. Mm-hmm. And they're very inexpensive. They're usually €5, maybe up to €7 a night to stay. But they're usually bunk beds, bed bugs, and other things that you may not want to encounter. At least I didn't want to. And because
no 5-star hotels along the way?
Well, there were. I found some. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I booked mine ahead of time. So I had some small little rooms. But I always had a private bathroom. That was my thing.
That's important.
And my excuse was, well, I had chemo just 9 months ago, so my immune system must be compromised. Oh, yeah. So I need to be private. You know? Yep. That was my excuse. Yep. But it was great. So I usually had some pretty nice rooms. Sometimes just a little room in a small hotel. I remember one I was in. I've called it a monk's quarters, but the guy who was taking care of the place was just a wonderful, wonderful guy who had to show me everything in the town on a map before I could even get up to my room to take a shower. Handed me a handful of caramels to take with me before I got up there.
Oh, how nice.
But I got to Burgos, which is one of the most beautiful has one of the most beautiful cathedrals in Spain. I think I thought it was probably my favorite of all the cathedrals I've been in.
Really?
And so I got to my hotel, and I had booked. That was the only one I'd had to pay for ahead of time. I'd booked it ahead, but I paid for it. When I got there, the lady said, "Well, you're paid, so you don't have to pay anymore. But for €10 more, I can give you a cathedral view." I thought, cathedral view, sure, €10, that's not a big deal. Well, I got up there, and I was really tired that day. I got up, and I opened up the window to my room, and right in front of me is this huge spires and all this gorgeous cathedral. And I hardly slept that night. I laid there with my little bare feet framing the cathedral and just enjoyed looking at the cathedral in every shade of light that entire night. It was really wonderful.
Wow. So worth the €10.
It was worth the €10. It was really, really nice. So Burgos was fun. And then I go through more small towns along the way. Leon is probably the next biggest city along the route. Mm-hmm. And Leon has got another wonderful cathedral, beautiful, beautiful cathedral. I had a nice room, but I didn't have a cathedral view that night.
No, hard to top that one.
It's hard to top it. It was really great.
Yeah.
So met some friends in Leon that I had met along the way, had a wonderful evening of dinner together and kind of catching up on people meet each other along the way, and then they kind of take off, and some people have faster schedules than others. Some walk faster. So sometimes somebody's ahead by 2 days or behind you by 2 days, and then somebody takes a rest day, so you end up just bumping into them again.
Right.
The first day I was walking out of Roncesvalles, I saw a guy in front of me with a bandana on his head and his backpack and just very determined walking. And when I came home and I looked at my pictures, I had a picture of him that very first day. And it turned out I met him about 2 days later. We were walking, and we ended up walking together for a while. And he told me his name was Frank, and he was from Vienna. So I didn't think much about it. But a few days later, I run into Frank again, and we kept running into each other over and we never planned anything, but we ran into each other every other day or every 2 days. He injured himself along the way, but he had paid for his whole trip ahead of time with a travel company. So he said he was going to probably have to go back to Vienna. But a couple of days later, I'm walking through a forest, and I hear this bicycle behind me. And bicyclists weren't our favorite people on the Camino, because you can ride a bike on the Camino, or you walk. You can ride a horse if you want. But the bicyclists tended to be a little less polite. So I hear this bike behind me, and I'm already thinking things about the bicycle. And turns out it's Frank. He's bought a bicycle to do the Camino.
Okay.
But somehow throughout the whole route, he and I would bump into each other over and over again. And we became great friends all along the way. And I finally found out he was a professor of economics at the University of Vienna. He wasn't just Frank.
Dr. Frank.
Dr. Frank. Very internationally well-known.
Really?
Really a very fascinating guy. Even the very last day, I walk into Santiago, and I'm going to a cafe just out on the street. And I sat down at the cafe, and in walks Frank. I mean, it was sort of a Camino thing that happens. There were just things that happen along the way that are very unique and very different.
Yeah.
So you meet a lot of friends, you meet a lot of people that are just interesting. So the last day or so, as you're coming into Santiago, getting close, you start to feel like, wow, I'm actually going to finish this. It's been 30-some days, 32 days by the time I got there, and it seemed like forever, and at the same time, it seemed like it was just over so quickly. So you have this mixture of joy and sadness that it's going to be done, because you've had all that time with yourself, really, and other people along the way. But walking into Santiago is a really wonderful experience, and then to come to the cathedral that you've read about, dreamed about, thought about, and to actually be there is really really dramatic. Yeah, it's really neat. It's a lot of fun.
I can just picture myself there with you as you're describing it too. It's so vivid.
And it's I came home from that one. Ainsley and Brady and Janet and Braden met me in the airport with a big banner. Was that I'd finally done it. So I thought, well, I'm done with that. I don't have to do that again.
Right.
And then about a month later, I thought, oh, I think I need to go again.
Oh, you were hooked.
So I went to Portugal the next time and walked up from Portugal along that way and entered into Santiago. And then I went to Norway the next year, and then I came back to Santiago. The next year I did the Camino Primitivo from the north part of Spain.
Oh, so
down.
You went 3 different paths
3 different
to get
routes.
to the same place.
I took 3 different routes into Spain.
Got
I don't
it.
like to do anything twice. So I took 3 different routes into Santiago, so I got to see different parts. Primitivo was brutal. That was the most difficult of all of them. It was shorter, but it was usually 2 or 3 mountains a day, and that was really hard.
2 or 3 mountains a day.
It was really, really hard, but it was worth it. It was really interesting.
Wow. Now I'm curious, out of the 3 different trips, what distinguished each of them for you? Like, as you look back on those memories, oh yeah, that was the trip where blank, besides going a different route, did it feel different each of those times, besides hurting more going over all those mountains?
Yeah. The first time was very emotional. I mean, it was a very emotional one.
Yeah.
The second time was more kind of fun. The Portuguese route is not so difficult. It's some of it's along the beach, so it's very pretty. But it's not as challenging. I met some really interesting people on that route. I met a group of caregivers from Australia that were on the Camino in order to help them with their caregiving, which was interesting. And then the Primitivo was just sort of a challenge. That was to see if you could physically just do that one.
Right.
So they were all different, very different routes. But you get to the cathedral, and the pilgrim mass is just kind of a very special experience. And They do pilgrim masses a couple of times a day.
Really?
Sometimes they're more elaborate than others. The one that I'll probably have at the end of the video was probably one of the more elaborate ones, with a procession throughout the cathedral. The cathedral's stuffed with people pre-COVID.
Right, yeah.
And then in the Catholic Church, they use incense a lot. Well, the thing about the cathedral in Santiago is the botafumeiro, which is a gigantic incense pot that they swing from transept to transept in the cathedral during the pilgrim masses that they do. So it's a very special experience. They don't do it all the time, but I've been fortunate enough that I saw it probably 4 times that I was there in the different routes.
Wow.
And one of the last ones I was there, the cathedral was finally, they'd had it, different spires had been enveloped in workmanship at that time, at different times. So the last time I was there, it was all unveiled. Yeah. So I finally got to see the whole front of the cathedral as it's supposed to be. So
how nice. Really neat. How special.
Yeah.
Now, as you're going along, you met some people. You met Dr. Frank. You met the American priest. Any other people you met that you thought were particularly interesting?
Yeah, I met a lawyer from California, and a German woman that he was walking with. The two of them we would meet for lunch and dinner at different times, and they would let me know when they were going to meet. So they would text me. So we would usually plan something. It was different than with Frank. We never planned anything. We just run into each other and kept showing up in every place that possible. It just very incredible. Yeah. In fact, he had a picture of me that he sent me later that in Lyon, when we bumped into each other on a stairway, I was doing something down in a park, and he was at the top taking a picture of the spires of the cathedral, and later on he had a picture of me down in this park. So that was different. It was just that for some reason we were supposed to be together throughout that whole route. Yeah. And I met on the Portuguese route, I met a lady from Australia and her sister-in-law from South Africa who had been walking a lot, and spent a lot of time with them. I went to a wonderful birthday party on the Portuguese route. Just happened to be in this small pension out in the country, and the woman told me that when I checked in, she said, well, I usually do dinner for pilgrims at night because we're so far out in the country, but I can't because it's my husband's birthday tonight. Oh. So I said, that's fine. I brought food. I don't need to have it. No, I want you to come to the birthday party. Aww. So she invited the 10 pilgrims that were staying, and we were from all over, from Iceland, from all over the world, because I'd never met any Americans on that particular route. And we went to this place that was just down the road from where we were staying out in the country. Well, it turned out this family owned vineyards, they owned olive groves, and it was like a gigantic private family restaurant that they had. And he had his friends from all over, from Lisbon and Porto. All these people had come to his party. Yeah. Just the most generous, kindest people in the world, and included us like we were family. And his wife said to me the next morning, she said, my husband, that's the first time we've ever done that, and he had such a good time. We are going to do that every year. And I said, well, I remember when his birthday is, so I'll be back.
What generous people.
Wonderful people. Yeah, I really met wonderful people all the way along the way. I met a young man on the Primitivo, one of our particularly hard climbs from Austria, that decided he was going to walk with me up this mountain together because I think he just wanted to make sure I made it up the mountain. So once we were up at the top, then he took off. But very generous, kind people all the way along the way.
About how many people do the Camino in a year? Any idea?
Well, the Camino Frances, the Compostela is what you get when you get to the Santiago Cathedral. So you have a pilgrim passport along the way. You get stamped each time. Mm-hmm. Every day you have to have a stamp on it in order to earn your Compostela at the end of the route. Mm-hmm. So the pilgrim office keeps statistics on all the people coming in and earning their Compostela, and they're literally in a very big year. There may be 200,000 people that walk the Camino, all the Caminos, in a year that get a Compostela. During holy years, which last year was supposed to be a holy year, but there were days when there were 0 Compostelas issued because of COVID. Nobody was walking.
Right.
But during holy years, there may be 250,000 people that end up getting a Compostela at the end of a route. And you have to walk at least 100 kilometers to get a Compostela. So a lot of tour companies and other people will drop people off and have a 4-day or a 5-day Camino experience where they do bits and pieces of it. Mm-hmm. And then they get 100 kilometers, so they're able to get a Compostela. The Camino Francés from Roncesvalles is 790 kilometers, so it's 500 miles. So those of us who walk the 500 miles aren't sure that 100 kilometers is really, really worth the Compostela, but sure. We try to be generous, and everybody should get one.
There you go. There you go. Any plans on doing it again or doing anything similar?
Yeah, I think maybe in the next year or two, maybe another one. There's a nice small one along the coast where you walk from one lighthouse to another, where there are 5 or 6 lighthouses along the coast of Spain on the Bay of Biscay.
Oh, nice.
That would be a nice water one.
Yeah.
I did go on 2019, got to my northern route. I was going to do 2 more of them, and then became ill, so came home.
I remember that.
Yeah. So that would have been a good one also. But this one will be nice if I get back.
Yeah. And finally, let's say that I'm planning to go there, which I'm not. I'd love to. But if I'm a person who's planning to go there, what would be some advice that you would give?
Pack light.
Pack light.
I learned that the first one I packed light, I thought, and what I thought was light wasn't light. The second one I packed lighter, still not light enough. The last one I think I got it right. I had 1 change of clothes and first aid kit and a few other things, and that was enough.
Some food?
Mm-mm.
You just pick up food as you go along?
As you go along, yeah.
Okay.
They have a wonderful the food stories are another whole bunch of stories, because the food is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the coffee con leche is wonderful.
Okay.
Chocolate croissants are wonderful.
You're making me hungry right now.
Yes.
So pack light.
Pack light. Yeah, you really don't need much. As they say, there are shops in Spain.
There are shops in Spain. They're happy to take your euros.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we packed a lot into this conversation. This has been fun.
Okay, good.
You got my appetite. I need to go home and talk to Ashley about, not just appetite for some of the Spanish food, but appetite to go and do the Camino one day. That sounds fantastic.
One day would be great. I think you'd love it.
That sounds great.
I'd really enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much, Gary.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching this episode of the Shepherd Podcast. Very enlightening, and I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed it. Please join us the next time as we continue to introduce you to people at Shepherd and tell you about their experiences. Until then, may the Lord keep you safe and in good health. The peace of the Lord be with you today.